Most video games look way nicer now than they did back in the 2000s, but there are some games that hold up pretty damn well. Today on Game Ranks, here are 10 games from the 2000s that graphically still hold up. Starting off from number 10, now this game is unique on this list because it's not really a demanding game with wild, realistic graphics and heavy physics simulation elements. Instead, Team Fortress 2 stays relevant here because of its stylized look, which was super unique at the time, and has helped it age way more gracefully than other games of that era with more realistic art styles, choosing to go with a bright, bold color palette instead of just revisiting the gray and brown, more realistic designs of games like Half-Life 2 and Portal, and making unique characters with fun, exaggerated proportions rather just going with the standard character designs of the time was a bold move, and it definitely paid off here. The whole vibe was pulled together with the game's maps as well, carrying that aesthetic over into the level design and creating fun, interesting maps that still had that cool, cartoonish look and feel to them that the game has become known for. Looking at this game, it's clear why modern games like Overwatch have been influenced so much by it, both in an aesthetic direction and mechanics, and even now, it still looks pretty good despite its fairly simplistic design. Moving on to number 9, we have Half-Life 2, and while Half-Life 2 doesn't look amazing by any means, it's impressive how well it's held up over the years for a game that released in 2004. Half-Life 1 to 2 was a huge jump in graphics, and Half-Life 2 is still way more playable than 1. The first game does not hold up as well as its sequel. One thing that Half-Life 2 has going for it is how bleak and gray the game looks. This look works very well actually for City 17 and does a really good job at selling that George Orwell 1984 Big Brother is watching vibe, which is why I think the look of Half-Life 2 works so well. The facial animation is what really stands out for us here though. Even now in 2019, the facial animations really hold up and do a great job of actually showing expressions, like a really good job at doing it. If anything, that's what really holds up in Half-Life 2. I wonder what Half-Life 3 would look like if that ever becomes a thing. Next, on number 8, we have Grand Theft Auto 4. Now, while GTA 5 is obviously the best looking GTA game and still one of the best looking video games just in general with all of its small details and whatnot, GTA 4 still holds up and is definitely still worth talking about. Just like GTA 5, it's the details that GTA 4 gets right, specifically with its setting, which is Liberty City, that's based off of New York City. It does a great job at recreating New York and really capturing what it's like, or at least what it was like 10 years ago. From the garbage in the streets to the fire escapes, I actually felt like I was walking around in a living, breathing New York City. Obviously, yeah, you can get it looking even better with mods, but we're specifically talking about the base game here. It did a great job at capturing the feel of different boroughs and neighborhoods as well, also including some famous landmarks such as the Empire State Building, the Flatiron Building, and the Statue of Liberty. Rockstar has always been good with nailing the settings of their game, so it's really no surprise that they nailed it here as well. And at number 7, at least for me, Far Cry 2 definitely felt like a game that was ahead of its time, both in systems and in visuals. Hell, when Far Cry 3 came out, I even remember a bunch of people complaining that Far Cry 2 still looked better, despite being 4 years old at the time. A lot of what made Far Cry 2 was its new engine, and its heavy focus on simulation that made the game look and feel unlike pretty much anything else at the time. Being in a setting that covered savannas and jungles, foliage was a pretty important aspect of the world design. The engine's focus on physics meant that all of the trees, brush, grass, and what have you all moved naturally based on the world's wind and other external forces built around it. All of that foliage was also dynamic in how it handled deformation. Plants could be hacked at, fire would spread in ways that you would expect fire to spread based on wind and other external factors, and all of it's just great. I mean, look at this game. It's wild to think that something like this came out in 2008, almost 12 years ago, and it still looks pretty damn good. The whole constantly suffering from malaria fits and all that stuff, less cool for sure, but visually, it definitely holds up. Moving on to number 6, we have Splinter Cell Chaos Theory. This is one that still to this day surprises me with how good it looks. This was one of the first games I played where I feel like they really nailed lighting and the difference between light and dark. Obviously, as you know, Splinter Cell is a stealth game, so you find yourself slinking around in the dark quite often, and you can tell a lot of time went into making the dark really dark. When you turn off the lights on a group of enemies, it's like pitch black, and walking around with your night vision goggles like right in front of them and them not being able to see you walking around, It was like the coolest thing. I felt so powerful. It's so good that even some modern horror games can take notes on how Chaos Theory handles their darkness and their shadows. The light here as well was amazing, the way it would bounce off of Sam's sneaking suit or reflect off of him when he was wet from rain, and the shadows it would create when shining through the windows or trees. For an Xbox game, it was really impressive, and honestly, I still think that even today, it's still impressive. At number 5, we have Bioshock. There were a lot of games that tried to have water effects and wet textures be their big thing, but no one really did it at the time as well as the first Bioshock. Bioshock, by its very nature, being a game set in an underwater dystopia, lent itself to these effects super well, and man, was it really a sight to behold at the time. Just the general look of gross wetness on everything combined with the implementation of normal mapping made it so you had some really gross but really impressive instances of like wet bricks and metal surfaces that would reflect really nicely with a lot of the lighting effects used in the game. The lighting in general is also notable because a lot of it was outside of the standard lighting models because of the setting, and everything had to have the look of being filtered and diffused through all of the water outside. All of those effects combined with the game's awesome retro-futurist art style made for a truly unique and great-looking game at the time that still holds up today. Now granted, 2K did release an updated remastered version for modern consoles and PCs, and if you want to play Bioshock in 2019, that's probably the version to play, but even still, the original release still looks damn good, especially when you think about how it came out in 2007. Moving on to number 4, we have Crysis. This one's a no-brainer, right? Like, Crysis in particular was the gold standard to knowing if your PC was good or not for a long, long time, to the point where can it run Crysis became a huge joke. Crysis was a pretty big deal, to the point where we here at GameRanks made an entire video explaining why it was such a big deal and continues to be talked about to this day. But part of what made it such a big deal was its graphics, which were absolutely mind-blowing at the time and still looks very good to this day. Crysis had a pretty big map that was filled with lush jungles, mountains, and beaches, and employed some really cool effects when it came to depth of field, motion blur, shadows rendering, and volumetric lighting. You also had some really wild environmental interaction, being able to just mow down trees with guns and stuff like that. It's a really cool effect that still looks awesome in 2019. In a lot of ways, the game feels like a tech demo that they spun out into a game just so they can show the world the cool stuff they were able to do. Another big reason Crysis was so notable is that it was one of the first games to ever support DirectX 10, which allowed the game to use around 85,000 shaders, which was still a pretty cutting-edge piece of tech back in 2007. The follow-up, Crysis Warhead, had a significantly lower barrier to entry, and with it some downgrades to the physics systems and overall visuals, but it still looks damn good when comparing it to other games, and it shows that the engine definitely held up. And now at number 3, Uncharted 2 was a graphical beast at the time. One of those games that you would show to your non-gamer friends and family to show them how good games looked and what they were becoming. The game had everything you would come to know the series for today, but in 2009. Big, flashy visual set pieces, spectacular motion captures and facial animations, and big, beautiful environments ranging from ruins, dank tombs, snowy mountains, villages. The range of locales and scale of the experience was huge, and it was all presented in that cinematic way that the series is known for, which made it a really great visual showcase for the PlayStation 3. While the previous game was also a really big showcase for the power of the PS3, Naughty Dog said that they estimated the original game utilized 30% of the console's power, so they ramped it up for the sequel. As a result, the environments saw a major overhaul and were much denser than they were before. Additionally, they were able to improve on the game's presentation by having 564 in-game cinematic animations, which is a huge improvement over Drake's Fortune, which only had 80. It's a gorgeous looking game, and even though later entries in the series have improved in so many ways, Uncharted 2 is a hell of a looker that still holds up to this day, and has only gotten better through remasters and the like. And at number 2, let's talk about the Resident Evil remake for GameCube for a minute. Coming from the OG Resident Evil, this remake looked a million times better, and was also way less cheesy as well, which really added to how great this remake is. It stuck with the fixed camera angles, pre-rendered backgrounds from the original release, and they totally nailed it here. Walking through a dark hallway with a bunch of windows, with the only light being from the moon as it cast shadows on the wall, looked so good, and also felt super creepy, constantly making you feel uneasy and always expecting something that wants to kill you to come crashing through the window. Or when you're outside or in the lab and there are puddles all around with light reflecting off of them. They did a great job with character models as well. Everyone here looks great, but I think it's the zombies and other monsters that really benefit here. Zombies looked way more grotesque and creepy, and the bosses like Yawn all looked great as well. I don't think I'll ever get the shot out of my head of Yawn coming on screen right before the boss fight where he opens his mouth and there's saliva just pouring out of there. This was recently remastered for current gen consoles, and besides getting the HD treatment, there really wasn't much else changed. It just held up that well. Finally, at number 1, we have Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, which was released in 2008. First off, I just want to point out that I think Metal Gear 2 and 3 both hold up graphically as well. For PS2 games at the time, they looked really good, and going back to replay them, they really do stand the test of time. But back to Metal Gear 4, I honestly think it could pass for a game that came out early in this current console generation, and is also one of the best looking PS3 games, right next to The Last of Us. It's just generally nice to look at, environments are great, character models are great, which is nice because this game has over 8 hours of cutscenes alone, so you're going to be looking at it a lot. Really, Metal Gear Solid 2, 3, and 4 still look damn good up until this day because thanks to the general design and art style, they didn't overdo it. So there's not tons about them that can look outdated today, and that's seemingly by design, and it works. Also, we just really freaking love these games. And those are 10 games from the 2000s that graphically still hold up. But we want to hear from you. Meet us down in the comments and let us know what you think. As you already know, hitting the like button really helps us out, and if you're new here, subscribing is a good idea because we put out videos like this every single day. As always, thank you for taking the time to stop by and hang out with us. We really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time right here at Game Ranks.